Welcome to the latest edition of Don't Take This as Gospel. We are in Dennis Prager's book, The Rational Bible, Exodus, God, Slavery, and Freedom. If you'd like to pick up a copy, please click on the affiliate link in the video description. We are in Exodus chapter 19. This is the run-up to the Ten Commandments, and the Israelites have just accepted the covenant that God wants to make with them. So, what does God require of them to do when He's going to lay out the Ten Commandments and other commandments for them? Well, one of the requirements is that God says, let them wash their clothes. He tells this to Moses. He wants the Israelites to wash their clothes before they encounter Him, and He reveals the commandments. So Dennis Prager, he's got a section on this called The Importance of Clothing, and he says the first way in which the Israelites must make themselves holy is by cleaning their clothes, something that seems surprisingly mundane. However, the Torah recognizes that we are physical beings, and therefore acknowledges how much the physical affects us, morally, spiritually, and in just about every other way. The impact of clothing on the individual is profound. People take themselves and what they are doing more seriously when they wear clothes that befit the circumstances. And taking one's time to dress more formally before appearing at any event is a statement of the esteem in which we hold that event. When you enter a church or synagogue, for example, you should show deference in every way, and clothing is an important component of that. Throughout American history, for example, it was expected of Christians to attend church dressed in what was referred to as their Sunday best. This commitment to wearing one's best to church has largely disappeared, hopefully not permanently, though it continues in other parts of the Christian world and among almost all Jews who attend synagogue. Now, I don't really have anything to comment like one way or the other as to whether it's appropriate. I mean, that's something that's going to be culture specific, and it's also going to be something that's church specific, especially if you're in the Christian world. So things may vary. Your mileage may vary from synagogue to synagogue. They may have their own dress codes. They may have, church to church. They may have their own standards. And you generally go to a church and you find out what the standards are by looking around the crowd, and then hopefully you're not underdressed, but if you are, you come back the next week and you're dressed in the proper attire. Now, as far as, my own personal experience with dressing for church has been varied. I know that I do believe that there is truth to what Dennis said about how we regard a particular event. I remember one time I was in high school and I was going to receive an award. And I was wearing my normal clothes for the day, and my mother wanted me to change and get dressed up in a shirt and a tie. And I was like, no, I just want to wear this regular shirt. She was like, no, you get dressed up. And then I did, and I had, a shirt and tie on. And I accepted the award, and when I sat back down, I told my mother, I said, I'm glad that I was wearing this, because this was something, it turned out, that was important to me, and I'm glad that I was showing my esteem for the event, just like Dennis Prager was saying. It was kind of like I was reflecting my high regard for what they were doing for me by dressing up. And so I believe there is merit to that idea of, okay, yes, you dress up for special occasions. The issue comes in as to what kind of special occasion does church signify. And it's funny because I've been in highly liturgical churches where they've had the ritual from week to week is rote, practically. It's like rote repetition from week to week, with the exception of the variations put in for certain holidays or saints' days or things like that. And the priest's sermon would be different, but other than that, everything would be the same. The audience responses would be the same. The priest's words would be the same. The deacons' words would be the same. I mean, everything. I mean, except for the scripture readings from day to day, from week to week, and the sermons, and the little liturgical differences. And so I remember when there was one priest who'd always say, I screwed up that a while ago. I was supposed to do this because it was this day and not that day. And it was always kind of funny because nobody in the audience would have known. Nobody. I mean, there might have been like one stickler for detail who would have wanted to tell him about it afterwards, but nobody else would have known. So I've been in churches with very different styles. I've also been in charismatic churches where there was absolutely no format whatsoever, it seemed. And having been in churches of all those kinds of spectrums, it really kind of depends on, I guess, what you think you're there for. And I guess the surprising thing about being in the liturgical churches is that in the liturgical churches, you really are going there to meet God. Because in the liturgical churches, those are the ones that more profoundly believe in the real presence of God in the Eucharist. They will have a communion service, say, every week. That's true for Catholic and Orthodox and probably some other Protestant denominations as well. And they have such a high regard for it that you would think that they would be dressed up in formal attire every time because, oh my gosh, I'm going to meet God in this little piece of bread and this cup of wine or the chalice of wine. It's the body and blood of Christ. It's the body and blood of God made flesh. You would think that those would be the churches in which there was the most rigorous dress, but it rarely was, from my experience in both the Catholic and Orthodox churches that I attended for a little bit. The most dressed up I ever went to church in, there was a Baptist church that I went to, and it was a very formal Baptist church. They had hymnals and all this stuff, and people in there were in their Sunday best suits and ties and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember it feeling really, really stuffy. It's one of those where it's when you dress up like that, it almost feels like you're trying to impress other people. It's not an expression of the high regard you feel for it, because it's almost a mundane sort of day. I mean, yes, it's Sunday, it's the holy day, you're going there to worship God, but it's mundane in the sense that you do it week to week to week to week to week. It felt like you were putting on a shell. And one of the things in Christianity is the idea of, especially in the Baptist, idea of Christianity, is the idea of imputed righteousness rather than intrinsic righteousness. You're not there because you yourself possess any sort of cleanliness or righteousness before God that it makes sense to dress up to display. Rather, you're a fallen sinner, you know it, and you rely on God's righteousness in place of yours to clean you up, so to speak. And so you don't have a need to put on airs. So I think one of the places that I really felt the most comfortable in, as far as the manner of dress was actually at this charismatic church that I attended. And I mean, this was a heavily charismatic church. This was one of these where you had people on their knees in the aisles, crying their eyes out, begging for mercy. You had begging for healing. You had people going up in prayer and falling backwards when the Spirit got them. You had people who were babbling in tongues up on the stage, and which you're really not supposed to do if you're in church. I mean, even the New Testament says that. You had people who were singing and dancing and twirling their little sticks with the flags on them, little flag twirlers, and it was almost three-ring circus type stuff. But the manner of dress was like really casual. I mean, the guy who was doing the service, the pastor for the day, he would be at least in a nice shirt and some slacks. But everybody else, I mean, it was down to t-shirt and shorts kind of stuff. But it was comfortable. It was very comfortable because you kind of got the feeling like you were going to a family get together. And in Christianity, that's more closer to what the idea of, or at least in evangelical Christianity, that's very much more closer to the idea of a worship service, is you are getting together in the household of God to visit with family. And this family knows you, and they don't expect you to put on airs, and they don't expect you to try to pretend that you're any cleaner or any happier or any better than you really are. And I have a sort of fondness for the laxity of dress in that place, because any kind of dress code that you would have tried to apply to that would have taken that we're all family here element out of it. And that's something that I never got in any other church. I don't think any other church that I ever went to had that laxity of style of dress, and yet the sincerity of the people who were there was just off the charts, because they were children of God, and they weren't afraid to acknowledge the childlikeness of that, right down to, I guess you could say, the clothes they wear. So when it comes to how you should dress in church, of course, I'm not advising one way or the other. I'm just basically telling you how I felt in those particular things. And I don't think it would fit if you were going to say a heavily liturgical church and you were, dressed like just family at a cookout, and going through all these highly rigid, ritualized motions. There would be something kind of incongruous about that, because if you're in a liturgical setting, you're already putting on airs, in the sense that you're usually saying words that you would never say if it were in your heart to say something. You would never say what's in the liturgies. You would never say things like, oh my God, I have mightily offended thee, and please accept this rational and bloodless sacrifice, and things that the priest says, things that the audience says back. You're already trying to fit yourself into a mold that doesn't really apply to you, because nobody speaks like that anymore, and yet you have to speak like that every Sunday. In those kinds of situations, why not wear a suit? It almost makes more sense to wear a suit, because you're already wearing words coming out of your mouth that don't really fit who you are. So why not wear clothes that don't really represent, how you really feel about yourself inside? And I sound critical about it, and I know there's different styles that appeal to different people, but I just remember how freewheeling and loose it was to be in one of those churches where the styles were anything goes, and yet you had a high regard for everyone. You didn't look down on anyone. There was no grounds to look down on people who were not trying in the least to put on airs. And when you see people who can be that genuine about who they are to other people, gosh, I mean, like I've said in the introduction to this series, I'm an ex-Christian, so that's something that's really closed off for me now. I mean, it would be anyway, because I would never go back to that church, just on account of what I now look back on and say, yeah, this is not necessarily the best biblical practices, and doctrines and stuff like that. When I left Christianity, I was actually in the Orthodox Church. I was on the highly liturgical side, and so I was dealing with that incongruity of seeing people in mostly casual clothes, adhering to this very formal structure and formal language that it just didn't fit. I miss that fitting in. I miss that sense of family. I will never forget my very few experiences with that church, and I'm not saying that all of them were fond. I mean, I did have some disregard for how they conducted themselves as well. I mean, the whole three-ring circus nature of a worship service at that church. I mean, it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever been to an actual circus, but you've got three rings with activities going on, and with the parishioners in that church, it was almost the same way. You'd have the guy, on his knees crying for healing in the aisles over here, and you'd have the people dancing on the stage over there. You'd have another person babbling in tongues over there. You had another person, they're waving their hands in the air, and it's almost like you're waiting to see if the elephant's going to crap over there or the trapeze artist is going to fall over there. You're waiting for something to go wrong, practically. It was a very visual spectacle that was distracting in the chaos of it all. So I feel like when I moved from that into a more reserved Baptist church, that wasn't really, stayed as far as the one where I had to wear a suit and tie, but rather the one that I wound up staying at probably the longest. It was a little Southern Baptist church, and they had, it was dressed casual, but it still felt comfortable, and there was, a little bit of structure to the service, but not much. I mean, it was a nice balance, is what I'm trying to say. But as far as the dress code goes, I do miss that. I do miss the idea that you were with family, and you were around people who dressed as if you were with family, and you didn't have to put on airs, and you didn't have to try and convince anybody that you were or felt better than you did. You could be honest, and you would be accepted. So as far as clothing goes, I mean, yeah, I mean, your mileage may vary. I mean, whatever faith tradition you're in and whatever the church you're in, I mean, they're going to have their own standards, and adhere to those. Don't feel like you're obligated to rock the boat. I just kind of wanted to talk about my experiences with that, and how I wish there were kind of more room for that laid backness in real religion, where you could be more like that guy who went in there and beating his breast saying, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner, as opposed to the Pharisee in a suit kind of looking over there saying, oh, I'm glad I'm not like this guy. So I don't know. Your mileage may vary, and don't take this as gospel. I'm Mike Partika. I hope you enjoy this series. If you do, please subscribe, and I will talk at you later.